Jerusalem, 1st century after Christ. The heat is oppressive and the dust from the stone street seems to penetrate everything. Inside an elite residence, a woman prepares for the day. Before her, a polished bronze mirror reflects an image that time has tried to erase. She dips a small bone rod into a finely carved stone jar. The substance is dark, dense, and possesses an almost hypnotic metallic glow. With surgical precision, she applies this paste to her eyelids, outlining her eyes with a deep black mark. To those observing from the outside, it is the pinnacle of sophistication and status. But beneath the surface of the skin, an invisible battle is beginning. When the Bible mentions in the 2nd book of Kings, chapter 9, verse 30, the act of Queen Jezebel painting her eyes before facing her final destiny, she was not using an innocent cosmetic like those we find today in modern pharmacies. She, and so many other women of Jesus' time, were manipulating a dangerous alchemy, a shocking mixture of metallic poisons, predator fat, and animal waste that transformed the face into a mask of beauty, but the body into a toxicity laboratory. Modern archaeology has just opened the cosmetic jars found in the ruins of Judea and in the caves of the Dead Sea. What scientists detected inside these 2,000-year-old containers is something that would make any current health authority shut down the site immediately. Lead at alarming levels, bone ash, and the repulsive yet valuable crocodile fat. In this documentary, we are going to excavate the truth behind the aesthetics of the ancient world. Why did women and men of the biblical era risk blindness and organ failure in the name of a striking look? Was it just vanity, or was there a spiritual and protective secret hidden in these lethal mixtures? Prepare to discover that the forbidden beauty of Jesus' time was not just painful. It was, literally, deadly. And the price paid for that glint in the eyes was much higher than the silver coins spent in the spice market of Jerusalem. To understand the danger, we first need to understand the powder. Kohl, as it was known, was the basis of everything. But what the merchants of the time called protection, modern science calls a sentence. We are about to enter the makeup laboratories of the past, where the main ingredient was not silk, but heavy metal. Welcome to the archaeological investigation of forbidden vanity. To comprehend the true nature of forbidden beauty, we need to descend to the damp basements of the apothecary workshops of Jerusalem and Alexandria. Forget the soft textures and volatile components of contemporary cosmetics. In the 1st century of our era, beauty was a matter of mining, weight, and danger. The backbone of all facial aesthetics of that time resided in a specific mineral, dense and with a mesmerizing metallic shine: galena. Scientifically known as lead sulfide, galena was the master ingredient of kohl, but the process to transform it into adornment was brutal. Imagine the scene. Artisans spent hours, sometimes entire days, hunched over mortars of volcanic stone or granite. They ground the raw rocks exhaustively, reducing the mineral to a powder so fine that it could float in the dust-laden air of the workshop. Each beat of the pestle against the mortar released microscopic particles of lead that were promptly inhaled by the workers and, later, applied directly to the eyelids of those seeking elite status. But why did the society of the 1st century, walking the same streets as Jesus of Nazareth, accept applying a heavy metal so close to the eyeball? The answer was not just aesthetic, but a complex and mistaken medical theory. At that time, the son of Judea and Egypt was seen as a physical and spiritual aggressor. The intense glare reflected by the white limestone stones of Jerusalem caused partial blindness and chronic eye inflammations. The sages and doctors of antiquity, influenced by Egyptian medical treatises like the Ebers Papyrus, firmly believed that the black line of lead around the eyes acted as a protective filter. They believed that the dense, dark makeup absorbed excessive solar radiation, protecting the retina, Additionally, there was the belief that lead salts repelled flies, which were constant vectors of purulent infections. Ironically, modern science, through chemical analyses conducted by researchers at the Louvre Museum, discovered that contact of lead with the skin in extremely low doses can stimulate the production of nitric oxide molecules. This compound strengthens the immune system against bacterial attacks. However, what the ancients failed to calculate, and what modern archaeology now reveals with horror, was the cumulative and systemic effect of this daily exposure to poison. Lead is a master of silent infiltration. When the black paste was applied to the edge of the eyelids, the heavy metal found a direct path to the interior of the organism through the tear ducts and the fine capillaries of the orbital skin. Once inside the bloodstream, lead was not eliminated. It was hijacked by the body, which confused it with calcium. It settled in the bones, the kidneys, and, most devastatingly, in the central nervous system. Imagine a woman of the high aristocracy from Caesarea or a wealthy follower of Herod's court. She exhibited a deep, enigmatic, and brilliant gaze, but behind that mask, her body was collapsing. What historians today call satanism or lead poisoning was an invisible epidemic. The symptoms began subtly and were often confused with demonic possessions or divine curses. The person felt a chronic fatigue that no night of sleep could cure, lancinating abdominal pains, which ancient texts described as lead colics, bent victims in half. Over the years, the poisoning evolved into permanent neurological damage. Excessive irritability, memory loss, mental confusion, and motor paralysis became the reality of those seeking aesthetic perfection. She, who painted herself to be seen as a goddess, ended her days with a mind fragmented by heavy metal. Jezebel's beauty, cited in scripture as an act of defiance and power, was actually a chemical embrace with death. Archaeology provides us with the physical proof of this tragedy. In recent excavations in elite cemeteries of the Roman and Herodian period, X-ray fluorescence analysis on skeletal remains revealed lead concentrations that exceed the acceptable limits for a modern human by more than 100 times. Cosmetic jars, carved from precious alabaster, were found in graves of young women who possibly died without knowing that the secret of their glow was the cause of their organic failure. But lead was just the mineral component. For this death powder to have the necessary adherence to last an entire day under the scorching sun, a vehicle was needed. A binding agent that gave the makeup a creamy, almost luxurious texture. And this is where the investigation takes us outside the borders of Judea, toward the banks of the Nile River. Merchants of the time did not just sell rock powder. They sold an alchemy that involved the fat of one of the most feared predators of the ancient world. Prepare to enter an even more disturbing dimension of biblical vanity. If lead was the invisible poison, the next ingredient was the physical manifestation of repulsion and exoticism. We are talking about crocodile fat, a substance obtained with blood and risk, used to ensure that the mask of beauty never moved out of place, even if the skin underneath was rotting. In the next block, we will uncover how this fat was extracted, the smell it exuded, and why the women of Jerusalem were willing to use animal excrement and secretions on their faces to achieve a status that history, for a long time, tried to hide. If lead powder was the mineral component that brought silent death, the makeup of the biblical era needed something to give it body, durability, and a texture that defied the desert sweat. In the streets of Jerusalem, where the wind carries the heat of the Dead Sea, a simple rock powder would fall off the face in a few minutes. To solve this aesthetic engineering problem, apothecaries and luxury merchants resorted to a source of raw material that came directly from the murky and dangerous waters of Egypt: the crocodile. Crocodile fat was the ultimate primer of the ancient world, but obtaining it was an odyssey of blood and risk. Expeditions were organized to hunt these reptilian giants on the banks of the Nile. For the Egyptians, the crocodile was the incarnation of Sobek, a god of fertility and military power. However, for the cosmetic market of Judea and Rome, the animal was just a valuable source of lipids. Once slaughtered and skinned, the subcutaneous fat was extracted and processed through slow cooking until it became a dense, yellowish oil, with an adherence capacity that no vegetable oil of olive or almond could match. Imagine the scene: a woman of high Jewish society, perhaps a young woman from the court of Herod Antipas, receiving from her servant a small alabaster bottle. Inside it, a mixture of galena lead powder with purified crocodile fat. When applied, this mixture not only tinted the eyelids, but created a waterproof barrier. The animal fat served as a long-lasting fixative, allowing the makeup to remain intact during banquets that lasted entire nights or processions under the 40-degree sun. However, the use of crocodile fat carried an olfactory secret that documentaries rarely mention. Despite the purification processes with aromatic herbs and myrrh resins, the residual odor of this animal fat was strong and penetrating. To mask the smell of processed carcass, massive amounts of incense and nard were added. The result was a heavy and oppressive perfume that had become the characteristic smell of the ruling classes. Wherever a noble woman passed, the trail of her luxury was a mixture of animal death and sacred spices. But the quest for forbidden beauty did not stop at fat. We now enter the most disturbing chapter of aesthetic archaeology: the use of excrement. Historical records from authors like Pliny the Elder, a contemporary of many of the events of the New Testament, describe practices that defy our modern logic of hygiene. Crocodilia, as it was called in Latin, was not just the fat but also the excrement of the animal, which was collected, dried, and ground. It was believed that this substance possessed skin-whitening properties. Yes, you heard correctly. Women of the elite of Jerusalem and Alexandria applied face masks made of crocodile excrement mixed with rose water to obtain pale and translucent skin. At that time, paleness was the greatest symbol of social status. Sunburnt skin betrayed the field worker, the slave, or the street merchant. In contrast, the white, almost cadaverous face indicated someone who spent her days protected in the marble atria of palaces, away from the brutal light of the sun. To achieve this ideal of aesthetic purity, they were willing to use what was most impure in nature. This Egyptian influence in first-century Judea was profound and generated an invisible but potent cultural conflict. Jerusalem was a divided city. On one side, the Levitical purity laws that Jesus and the Pharisees debated intensely, which preached the separation between the sacred and the profane. On the other, a Hellenized elite that looked to Alexandria and Rome as the centers of sophistication. For these women, fashion surpassed religious law. They were importing not only ingredients, but an entire pagan philosophy of body worship that contrasted violently with the austerity of the prophets. The commercial connection between Egypt and Judea was a two-way street for vice and virtue. Camel caravans crossed the Sinai carrying bundles of fine linen, copper basins, and the precious Egyptian-style cosmetic jars. What archaeology unearths today are not just objects of vanity, but evidence of a primitive globalization where the desire for beauty and status ignored borders and scruples. But how do we know all this? How can we be sure that these ingredients are not just myths of ancient historians who like to exaggerate? The answer lies in the depths of the earth and in advanced chemistry. Biblical archaeology has ceased to be just the search for coins and wools. It has become a molecular investigation. In the next block, we are going to analyze the material evidence. We will enter the caves of the Dead Sea and the ruins of the mansions in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, where jars sealed 2,000 years ago were finally opened. What scientists found inside them confirms the worst suspicions. Reality was much more shocking than any ancient text dared to describe. Prepare to see the physical evidence of forbidden beauty. For centuries, descriptions from historians like Pliny the Elder or the warnings of biblical prophets about excessive vanity were treated by many as mere moral metaphors or literary exaggerations. But the land of Judea kept incontestable material evidence. In the last 5 decades, precision archaeological excavations have transformed what were only texts into physical and chemical reality. The desert, with its extreme aridity, served as a perfect time capsule, preserving organic substances that anywhere else in the world would have disappeared in a few years. One of the most significant finds occurred near Qumran, and in the refuge caves of the Dead Sea, archaeologists found small cosmetic cases made of wood, bone and bronze, dated exactly to the 1st century. Inside them, there was not just dust, but solidified residues of a black and dense paste. Taking these samples for mass spectrometry and X-ray fluorescence analysis, scientists were stunned. The molecular signature of that substance revealed a concentration of lead that defies modern understanding. It was pure galena, lead sulfide, processed with a chemical sophistication that allowed the metal to remain stable for 2 millennia. But the investigation went further. In Jerusalem, in the excavations of the so-called palatial mansion and the burnt house, residences of the priestly elite destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 after Christ, researchers discovered something even more revealing: alabaster and ceramic jars finely decorated that still contained traces of animal lipids. The chemical analysis of these oils revealed a fatty acid composition that did not correspond to olive oil or common vegetable oils in the region. The molecular structure pointed to a heavy animal fat, compatible with that of the Nile crocodile. This proves that the trade of exotic cosmetics between Egypt and Judea was a massive and extremely lucrative logistical network, moving fortunes to satisfy the desire of Jerusalem's upper classes. Imagine the work of an archaeologist upon finding one of these jars, opening the stone lid. The smell that emanates can be described as a mix of ancient earth and a residual metallic odor. It is not just makeup, it is a biological record. In one of these containers, small bronze applicators were found, thin rods with a spatula-shaped end. Microscopic analysis of these tools revealed that they were used to mix the lead powder with the animal fat at the exact moment of application. This means that the women of that time were, in a certain sense, their own alchemists, manipulating dangerous chemical reagents every morning before their polished bronze mirrors. Another overwhelming piece of evidence comes from physical anthropology. When analyzing the mortal remains of young women buried in stone sarcophagi in the Kidron Valley, researchers found lead deposits encrusted in the bone structure of the eye socket. This phenomenon, known as bioaccumulation, occurs when the body, unable to expel the heavy metal, begins to integrate it into the bone tissue. These women were, literally, transforming into metal while they were still alive. Forbidden beauty left a permanent mark that not even death and the passage of 2,000 years could erase. In addition to lead and crocodile fat, chemical analyses revealed even more exotic ingredients, such as antimony and manganese oxide. Some samples of kohl found in the Masada region show that the makeup recipe varied according to the owner's wealth. The wealthier the woman, the more complex and dangerous the mixture. They were not just seeking aesthetics, they were displaying the reach of their economic power. Using makeup with ingredients coming from hundreds of kilometers away was a way of telling the world that they possessed the resources to dominate nature and borders. What do these archaeological finds tell us about the world in which Jesus lived? They tell us that the contrast between the message of simplicity and spiritual purity and the reality of an elite obsessed with appearance and luxury was glaring. While the prophets preached about the beauty of the heart, the streets of Jerusalem saw faces transformed by substances that were, at the same time, symbols of status and agents of physical destruction. Archaeology does not just confirm ancient accounts, it makes them visceral. It allows us to see, through chemical residues, the pain and vanity of an era that sought exterior perfection at any cost. However, to understand the total impact of this practice, we need to look beyond the laboratory. We need to understand the cultural and social context of first-century Judea. How could a society so religious and focused on purity laws embrace such impure and dangerous ingredients? That is the mystery we're going to solve in our final block, where we will connect ancient vanity with the eternal human quest for perfection and the price we still pay for it. To understand the true impact of forbidden beauty, we need to walk through the courtyards of the Second Temple of Jerusalem in the 1st century. The Judea of that time was a cultural and religious powder keg. On one side, we had a peasant and artisan population that sought to rigorously follow the purity laws described in the Torah and in the teachings of the prophets. On the other, a priestly aristocracy and families linked to the power of Rome, who saw in cosmetic aesthetics a form of social demarcation. The use of lead on the eyes and crocodile fat on the face was not just an aesthetic choice. It was a declaration of belonging to a cosmopolitan world that many religious people saw as decadent and sinful. The contrast was brutal. While preachers and prophets, including John the Baptist and Jesus of Nazareth himself, spoke about the importance of inner purity and simplicity, the windows of the mansions in the Jewish quarter revealed women and men whose faces were true masks of metal and animal oil. In that society, beauty was a political weapon. A woman who displayed the perfect eyeliner of Egyptian Galena was telling everyone that her family possessed the commercial connections to import expensive poisons from Alexandria. She was above the dust of the street. She was untouchable, or at least that is how she wished to appear. However, there was a profound spiritual conflict. The book of Proverbs and the warnings of the prophet Isaiah had already condemned, centuries before, the haughtiness of the daughters of Zion, who walked with painted eyes and excessive adornments. For the devout Jew, heavy makeup was associated with the figure of Jezebel or the pagan practices of neighboring nations that worshipped gods of stone and bronze. Painting one's eyes was seen by many as an attempt to alter divine creation, a mask that hid the truth of the soul. But the attraction to the exotic and the forbidden was too strong. Even at the risk of social ostracism or religious condemnation, the elite continued to dip their bronze brushes into the lead jars. The tragic irony is that this quest for exterior perfection accelerated interior decay in a literal way. While they sought the eternal gaze of Egyptian statues, lead poisoning, Satanism, corroded their health. The irritability and tremors caused by the heavy metal were frequently interpreted as afflictions of the spirit or demonic interventions. Many of these highborn women suffered in silence with chronic abdominal pains and loss of vision, without ever suspecting that the remedy for their beauty was the cause of their agony. They were dying for vanity, 1 milligram at a time, transforming into monuments of lead before even being placed in their sarcophagi. Today, looking at the cosmetic jars displayed in museums in Israel or Europe, what we see are not just relics of a passing fashion. We see the record of a human struggle that spans millennia, the desire to mask our biological fragility through chemical artifice. The forbidden beauty of Jesus' time is a mirror for our own era. Today, we no longer use pure lead or raw crocodile fat, but the quest for eternal youth and facial perfection continues to lead us to risky procedures and synthetic substances whose long-term effects we still do not know. The verdict of history is clear and pitiless. Those women and men who walked through Jerusalem 2,000 years ago believed that their names and their beauty would be preserved by their wealth and their adornments. In the end, what remained of them was the poison that killed them. Archaeology unearthed their secrets, revealing that the true face of that time was much less glamorous than the paintings suggest. Behind the metallic shine of the eyes, there was pain. Behind the crocodile fat that polished the skin, there was the decomposition of a central nervous system. The history of humanity is a succession of cycles of vanity and discovery. First century Judea teaches us that when the price of beauty is life itself, aesthetics ceases to be art and becomes a pathology. Lead and crocodile are just the symbols of an era that tried, unsuccessfully, to beat time with the aid of poison. May the lessons unearthed from the desert sands remind us that the most lasting beauty is that which does not need a mask to exist. This was one more deep dive into the shadows of biblical history. What does archaeology still hide beneath the stones of Israel? What other lethal secrets did the ancients take to their graves? The answer may be just one excavation away. If you were fascinated or horrified by the brutal reality of beauty in the ancient world, do not let this investigation end here. To ensure you continue receiving these exclusive documentaries on the mysteries of the Bible and the discoveries that modern science is revealing, subscribe now to the channel and activate the notification bell. Leave your like if you believe that historical truth is worth more than any myth, and comment below, would you have the courage to use these ingredients if you lived in the 1st century? Or do you believe that even today we make the same mistakes in the name of aesthetics? Your participation is fundamental for us to continue bringing light to the shadows of the past. And if you want to know more about what archaeology says about other biblical characters, click on the video that is appearing now on your screen. In it, we explore an even darker secret found in the ruins of Jericho. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you at the next excavation.